looking at the data, we can see that most staff feel that their feedback sometimes has an impact, or more often than sometimes has an impact. But we've seen that across all of the staff surveyed in the previous academic year, around a quarter, so 26%, felt that their feedback rarely or never had an impact. This is something that, as a Juryo, we care quite passionately about. The kind of premise on which we're founded is that listening to your people and kind of getting their input and bringing them on the journey with you is something that is going to set you up for success in the longer term. So this is something that we think, okay, 3/4 of people sometimes feel their feedback has impact. We want to push that higher. We want to kind of work with trust to kind of improve that and understand how we can make that stronger. And then the kind of more direct question: how likely are you to recommend your workplace as a good place to work? You can see that most staff in most schools are quite positive. But we're looking at by far higher proportion of staff rating kind of 8, 9, or 10 in terms of likelihood to recommend their workplace than we are those who are not likely. So only kind of 10% scored it 3 or lower, 15% scored it 4 or lower. Most staff are likely to recommend their workplace, at least to some degree. So that's great. And so we decided that this was something that we should notify our kind of best performing trusts about, so that they can celebrate this kind of great achievement. Within our platform, you can already see kind of how far above the benchmark you are, but you can't see where exactly you are within that. So we decided that this was something that was worthy of an award. And we had a close look at that question, and we split this based on primaries and secondaries to make sure that there's a good mix. And here are the top 10 schools and those who won the Staff Choice Award when we launched it in the autumn term. So I'm going to give a shout out to everybody, but as you can see, we're going to spend more time with a couple of those trusts. So Abingdon Learning Trust, Ad Astra Academy Trust, Castleman Academy Trust, Cirrus Primary Academy Trust, Cornwall Education Learning Trust, Inspiration Trust, Learning Partners Academy Trust, and the Pinnacle Learning Trust were all of our award winners for this particular question. And joined today by Dan and Rich from the Cornwall Education Learning Trust, and by Jane from the Pinnacle Learning Trust to share a little bit more about that. I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to Dan and Rich to introduce yourselves and to share a little bit more about Cornwall and the kind of the context of the schools within your trust.
Thank you, Iona. So my name is Dan Morrow. I'm the trust leader for CELT, or Cornwall Education Learning Trust. I won't go through all the slides because everyone can see them, but effectively we're a medium to large size organisation with 9,000 pupils and 1,200 staff. We are based in Mid Cornwall, and it's interesting because we do go across all ranges of age. And Jane, I know, again, similarly to the provision that you're able to provide as well. And I think that offers us some real opportunities with our staffing. I think it's important to say we do have a strong track record in our outcomes and indeed inspections, but I think the biggest thing we're proud of is actually the fact that that sense of belonging, pride and joy is something that we see every day amongst our young people, and that exemplifies then, I think, how our staff feel. We do serve some exceptionally high levels of deprivation. Cornwall's an interesting place because it's very beautiful and it's absolutely where tourists want to come, but there's a lot of disguised poverty and there are some areas of real deprivation that we do serve. But that doesn't change our expectations or aspirations. And I'm about to hand over to Rich Cardigan, who's the head at Polterre, the school that was recognised in this award. And I think it's true to say that Polterre has been on its own journey, and then where we've got to as a school, and exemplified, I think, within our organisation as a whole is something we are deeply proud of. So, Rich.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Yeah, very good afternoon, everybody. Rich Cardigan, head teacher at Polterre, and it's a pleasure to be here. And we so often talk about student relationships and the importance of that staff-student relationship, but to be talking about those staff relationships, I think, is so important, and that is certainly what has driven our school to some fantastic outcomes. I'm obviously very proud of the survey results. And it's about how do we connect as a staff body. It's that balance between trust and kindness, but also that challenge and accountability is so important. And having those clear boundaries, high expectations. And I think the most important thing that we've got better at is that communication is so clear at all levels within the organisation, trust and at school. I think the other important point for me to mention is around the culture of the school. This takes time, and I've been really pleased actually with our Regerio survey over the last 3 years. There's been a sort of an improving trend, but these things, it does take time. We very much started as a school, it's been on a transformational journey, but we started around behaviour strategies, which then led obviously to sort of teaching and learning, personal development, and then sort of inclusion and adaptive teaching. But it took a while, and it's about supporting staff at every stage of our journey. There are so many multi-agendas within schools, and it is trying to give staff sort of one plate at a time, as opposed to balancing so many. And then obvious things around CPD provision, the opportunity across the trust, the coaching provision, incremental coaching, and those regular check-ins, which again, we do, I think, very positively.
So the introduction and why Rich has gone into a bit of detail at this point is merely to say, and I think it's a really important point to note on this, part of that relationship and improvement has come from using Regerio surveys over a number of years, really learning the lessons from it. I think when you undertake a piece of work like that, if you're not listening and reacting and responding and really taking that "you've said we are doing" approach, then you're not maximizing the impact. There's no point listening to our staff if we're not then doing something about it. And I think Polterre is a great example of a school that's been on that journey.
It's about that honesty and that transparency, I think, around that feedback, and allowing colleagues to feel that sense of belonging and being highly valued within the organisation.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, I think that point around kind of listening and bringing people along. I'm gonna ask one of my colleagues, Helena, if you can share in the chat some of the information from our stakeholder feedback hub around what to do after collecting feedback. I think that would be really timely. This is to Dan and Rich's point around the kind of "you said we did." How are we kind of making sure that we are listening and showing our colleagues that their input is important and is helping to make good decisions. Jane, let me hand over to you now to introduce yourself, introduce Pinnacle, and tell us a little bit more about the background of the trust.
Thanks, Iona. Hi everyone, I'm Jane Clark. I'm CEO of Pinnacle Learning Trust. As you can see on the slide, we're based in Oldham. So yeah, some similarities and some differences, I think, in terms of Cornwall versus Oldham. Looking out the window and it's raining, but it may be in Cornwall as well, I don't know. So just to tell you a little bit about our trust, we are a relatively small trust in that we've only got 5 academies, but actually quite large when you bear in mind the number of pupils. We're around 5,550 staff. And largely that's because one of our academies is a sixth form college that's 2,300 plus in terms of students. We've got 2 primary schools, a junior school and a secondary school, as you can see. And we've grown over the last, well, the trust's been around for about 8 years now. But it's in the last couple of years that we've grown from having just 1 in each of the phases to then having 3 primaries and then 1 secondary, 1 sixth form college. Our Ofsted profile is good or better. We've got some outstanding subgrades, but 4 academies are good. And then our most recent joiner joined as a directive academy order in 2024. So currently RI very much on a positive trajectory. And then I think the next slide tells you a little bit about levels of disadvantage. And I know that's similar to some of the things that you've said, Dan. There's a lot of disadvantage and deprivation in Oldham. It is quite a diverse borough in that there are some more affluent areas as well, but all of our academies are in the top 10% most deprived areas in the country. There's quite a lot of diversity in terms of our trust. It's quite mixed at OSFC, but the majority of pupils in our schools are South Asian heritage. And there's a lot to celebrate in that diversity, we feel, as well. We do have some quite high levels of complex needs, particularly in one of our primary schools, but across the primaries, and that's something that increasingly coming through the system, our secondary schools starting to tackle and so on. And it is true to say that in each of our phases, pupils' starting points are below average. The two, I haven't sort of singled out Broadfield and OSFC, which are the two sort of award winners in this category, because I think actually our context is very similar across our trust, because we're also relatively close together. And I like to think as well that our other three were just below the top 10. So I think that we're all fairly similar in terms of that initial context. Is that okay to start with, Iona? That's
lovely, thank you. And now I'm gonna stop sharing slides, and I think we'll move to a chat. I'm gonna ask our colleagues at Celt and Pinnacle to share some stuff, but anyone who's got a question that they would like to put to either, please do add it into the chat, and we can weave that in as well. But let's start with the big question, and Jane, I'll start with you as you're, I can still see you big on the screen. Tell us why you think the two schools won the Employer Choice Award.
I think that it's actually a really tricky question, because I don't think it's down to any one thing. I think that there is something about our trust and academy culture that I think is particularly evident in the two that won the awards. I think it's fairly intangible, but it is something that we work quite hard at in practice. So, for example, we do talk about our trust, and that being something, we don't talk about the trust being some remote distant thing where, you know, some other people are doing things to the people who are working in schools. It is collectively our trust, and we've worked quite hard at that, and really thought about the communication and the words we use. We've done some work in terms of raising the profile of the work of our trust and the impact and the difference that we're collectively making. We do, I mean, I think the use of surveys is a part of it, in that it is important to listen to staff and to celebrate what those surveys tell us and what we hear from staff, but also to ensure that we're then picking up on the things that you know, they reveal in terms of areas where we could improve. I think it's really important, and I think it's a feature of our trust, that we treat people as individuals and try and take individual needs into account. And I think that there's a lot of effort goes into building effective individual relationships with colleagues, and not having a sort of them and us between staff, teaching staff and support staff, that we're all part of the same team. And I think that that's something that permeates through our trust. I think that we're very open and transparent and honest about things. We don't keep things from colleagues. These don't sound like they're earth-shattering things at all, but I do think that they're part and parcel of what makes staff feel so positive about working with us. There's a lot of respect between colleagues at whatever level, and I think that although clearly we do have structures and you know, those are hierarchical in part, in practice it doesn't feel like that on a day-to-day basis. I think the way that colleagues work together and the willingness of everyone to listen to others and to adjust ideas and to respond is quite significant. There's a real dedication to being friendly and warm and welcoming, and Dan, you used the word belonging. That's one of our values too, and I think that that's really important both for staff and for students, that there's that sense of us all pulling in the same direction. I think that colleagues recognise the significance and the importance of what we do in terms of making a difference collectively to young people's lives, and there is really significant evidence and impact of that. We support our staff to support our students, so you know, we put various things in place. We have a staff engagement group, for example, so just some of those. I don't think that they are tokenistic when they're threaded through everything that you do. I think that, you know, there are opportunities for staff to come together. We've just had our annual Staff Family Fun Day where colleagues bring their families as well, and that's just an opportunity for people to get to know each other. And I think that at the core of success, I think, is relationships and people and a focus on people. And that's something that we take very seriously and we think very carefully about. We build our calendar carefully so that we're mindful of where we're putting events that might fall together, and just try and bear in mind workload and so on. And I think, yeah, just recognising that every role, every voice is important and is valued. I think those are probably some of the things that give you a bit of a feel for how we operate.
Perfect, thank you. And we'll dig into all of that in a moment. But before we do that, Dan and Rich, same question. Why do staff want to work at your schools?
It is a good question. And just before coming to it, I think Jane just exemplified something. Firstly, that was a masterclass, I think, in what intentional culture is all about. Because intentional culture, whilst it might not sound earth-shatteringly innovative, is harder to walk that talk than people perhaps realize sometimes, because we're all caught up in the day-to-day, and we're caught up in operational, and we're caught up really in our vocational need to always put children first. But just like Jane, we're a great believer that investing in the big people make sure that the little people get the deal that they deserve. The second point I'm going to make is actually to be really clear that as a trust leader for Celt and coming in this year, it's been really interesting actually, because I wouldn't say that our entire trust culture is what has supported the success of Polterre. And in fact, as trust leader, I'm using and learning the lessons from Polterre School to really adapt and be much more intentional, as Jane just described so well, across the whole organisation. And I think there's something to reflect on, that sometimes in trust, we look at the whole without actually looking at where we already see really good and individual practice. And I think sometimes what we need to do is really just celebrate and exemplify where we see a superb culture in action, as we do at Polterre School and a number of other schools, to be fair. But my work is to make sure that that's the standard, and that's the entitlement, and that's the expectation, so that what the staff receive and of course appreciate at Polterre School becomes true of all 1,200 staff who work across the trust. But Rich is able to exemplify the work much better at Polterre than I could.
A little bit. Because I feel it is a difficult question. It isn't just one thing. Jane's already alluded to that, as Dan has. But I think it's as soon as you come through the doors, you can feel it. There is a sense you can feel that sort of relationship, that positive relationships between staff and students, and between staff and staff. And it's not just about the fact that maybe SLT will give every member of staff, you know, a birthday card from them, or when they phone me in the mornings, I'll make sure if they're poorly, I'll always make sure I check in with them, a member of staff. They can feed back to me. The door's always open. You know, not always the same staff get to go on the ski trip. All of those sort of small things, you know, that we obviously we build in. But I think the most important thing is we really do invest in them. And again, it comes back to what I said before. It's just trying to keep just one plate spinning as opposed to many. That incremental coaching models and that CPD for staff, and supporting our staff in a very different way. And we have a very different sort of performance management system and structure, again, which Dan has been hugely behind and part of. And I think, again, it is just very much about the people. We want people to get up and want to come to work. We want them to come to Polterre. We want them to work at Celt, because ultimately that is how you're going to drive a successful school. Being part of the team Polterre is so important. That culture that you develop, being proud to wear the staff jacket, etc. It seems like a very small thing, but it is so important that people want to work within your organisation. And the final thing I'll say is it does. Everything we do is centered around the students, of course, and the staff, but it is built on those positive relationships. If you haven't got that, then it becomes very, very difficult to move anything forward.
And to be clear, what I think Polterre does exceptionally well, and indeed any school I've led or come across in terms of people, it's about adults being able to be their whole selves. It's about being able to be your whole self at work. We go through ups and downs in our own lives. And yes, we wear a professional cloak and we have the ability to do what we need to do to serve our vocation. But what we don't want is Stepford staff who come in and feel that they can't actually be human beings. And that's why I think it's really important we do have people strategies and move away from the idea that humans are resources, because they're not. Humans are assets. They're to be valued, they're to be cherished, and they're to be held in a way that means that they can become their best selves and do their best work, but also that they do feel genuinely part of something that they know that it's authentic care. and that we will celebrate and sometimes grieve together, depending on what's happening in our schools and our communities, in a way that means we are greater than the sum of our parts. And that's what culture should always be.
Yeah, I love that. And I think both of you have spoken about the kind of the diversity of your workforces, and I think they are, there's probably not that many things that are more different on the surface than rural Cornwall and Oldham as two parts of the country that have kind of different makeups, but both trusts have a commitment to inclusion. And I think the wording that that you use at Kelt is catalyst for systemic change. I'd like to hear, Dan, your thoughts around how does inclusion look in practice? What does this look like in practice? And then Jane, I think I'll ask you a similar question.
So I think it's threefold, actually. Firstly, it's about making sure that we are being, again, really intentional, as Jane was talking about, not just in culture, but actually also in policies and entitlement. So, for example, we're really encouraging about flexible working. I think sometimes in schools and education, we can see it almost as a barrier or a challenge, but actually, Polteer is a great example where I think around 25% of staff are on a flexible working contract. And so I think we've got to be really open to the fact that every individual has something to contribute. And quite frankly, many of our colleagues on flexible contracts give a lot more than sometimes they're actually in the building for, and we need to really understand and recognize that. I think the second thing around inclusion is also looking to ensure that we are creating a space in which everyone's unique identity is understood. And so we have a number of staff who are neurodiverse or with physical disabilities, and it's about creating an atmosphere where they aren't just tolerated, but they're accepted, they are celebrated, and they are absolutely part of our normal way of being. And therefore, that inclusion for us has been really intentionally and important around those protected characteristics of the Equalities Act, but in a way that means we're just greater than the sum of our parts by being diverse in our experiences, our lives. And the third thing, actually, which is really important in the culture piece, is making absolutely sure that we don't become an echo chamber. So we put a lot of work into challenging each other's thinking, looking at diverse perspectives, looking at different ways of looking. And again, because of our context of Cornwall, making sure that we're not just looking at the world through a very regional or quite a superficial lens. And that's working with partners like LIFTR and others who really help to open the world for both pupils and for staff, frankly, to ensure that therefore we're taking on something that's really important. So I'll give you a very quick example. As we were just discussing before this, we're doing big pieces of work where we're working with colleagues around people from global majority backgrounds who may not be exemplified in our area, but are exemplified within our country and therefore the experience, and looking to make sure that what we don't do is leave any cultural gaps that mean inclusion is more challenging and perhaps less expected than it should be for any of our young people in our country.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned LIFTR. I think they're such a fab organisation. I'm going to pop a link in the chat to their website. They break down the geographical barrier and say, actually, you can see what the entire world looks like. We will show you the realities of other places. And yeah, it's such a good point. If a child has come from somewhere that's not very diverse and then they go to university in London, suddenly they're meeting people from all different walks of life. I think, yeah, things like that. Not allowing the geography to be the barrier. That's great.
It's a challenge to overcome, but it isn't a barrier. And ultimately, one of the biggest things we do in education is break down those transition steps to make sure that there's less friction and there's less dissonance for our young people and indeed our adults. And so every threat can become an opportunity with the right planning and right heart of making sure it can work for all.
Nice. Yeah, and I remember Evelyn Ford, she says a lot, you can't be what you can't see. Yeah, maybe there's people within the school who are questioning certain things about their identity, and they don't know, they don't have the language around that because they've never heard it or seen it or anything. So yeah, I think that's wonderful. Jane, what about you? How are you? All your schools obviously are located in Oldham. How do you balance the kind of your approach to inclusion?
I think there's a lot of what Dan's just said that resonates in terms of our approach with colleagues. I think that flexible working has been something that our original, when we first established the trust, it was the sixth form college with the secondary school, and our central services approach and our sort of people strategy arguably has kind of grown out of that initial partnership. And there has perhaps been greater flexibility in the sixth form college sector that we've then tried to roll out and provide that sort of flexibility across the whole trust wherever possible, recognising it's not always possible in exactly the same way, but we try to ensure that we tailor that to individual members of staff. So I think there's a really supportive and we will try to find a way type culture in terms of giving people individual flexibility where they need it and where we can. We've got, for example, I think a very positive, I don't even know what it's called. It's not called the request for absence policy. It's got a far sharper title than that. But, you know, if a member of staff needs some time for something, we will invariably find a way to give that without it being to the detriment of the pupils and the students, because that's really important. But I think, as Dan said, you know, when you give, you also get back, don't you? And that's all part of that kind of virtuous cycle. Similarly, we've got all sorts of groups and opportunities for students and staff to work together that enable students to see really positive role models in our staff body and to celebrate diversity in all of its forms, be, you know, the whole range of protected characteristics. We try to give as many kind of enrichment and cultural capital opportunities to our students, and those are facilitated by our staff. And I think what's been really lovely as we've grown as a trust is that there's been more of that possible for the students across the different phases. So for example, we've got a kind of a reading buddies scheme, sixth form college students with our primaries, similarly maths mentoring, science mentoring. We've got an eco conference, all kind of organised by colleagues, but giving students opportunities that they wouldn't necessarily get in their individual phases. And I think that, you know, I know that this is about staff and being an employer of choice, but actually for staff having the opportunity to get involved in those things is a real positive and something that makes the reason that we're here all the more evident on a day-to-day basis. So I think that, yeah, there's a whole range of things, but yeah, it seems to work okay.
Nice. And as you say about the staff being able to get involved in it, that's what Dan's saying about kind of bringing your whole self. If you've got a passion for sustainability or for whatever, if you can kind of explore your hobbies as or well, sustainability is probably not a hobby, but explore your passions with and there's opportunities for that alongside the pupils, and bonus, you get to be a good role model at the same time. So I think that's really, really cool. Let's talk a bit about professional development. Rich, you've mentioned it as kind of a key focus at Polteare. I'd like to hear from both trusts if you've got any sort of particularly impactful approaches that you've taken. What do you think makes for the most powerful professional development, and if you've got any kind of really cool stories of finding someone's potential and being able to unlock that either within Polteare or Kelt more broadly, or within Pinnacle. Jane, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. I think one of the things that we do in terms of professional development is it's very personalised. So a lot of our professional development is in-house. And that's not to say that people don't get the opportunity to, you know, we've had significant uptake in terms of staff engagement with MPQs, and we work closely with our local teaching school hub, but we also have devised some programmes based on staff feedback that we deliver internally. We also have a research school within our trust, and that's been hugely advantageous in terms of our own practice and ensuring that that's as strong and as evidence informed as it can be, but also that gives colleagues an opportunity to get involved themselves in exemplifying practice, in facilitating on courses as well. So professional development with us is both something that you receive, but also something that you can get involved in delivering. And we've had a particular focus over the last year, currently only with senior leaders, but it's it's something that we're sharing more across the trust, and we may well be behind the times with this, but particularly focused on coaching and just providing support for colleagues to have that opportunity to work with somebody outside of the organisation that's not internal, but that's been hugely beneficial. And I think I think the trust exec team, which is all of our principals plus our CFO, COO and myself, along with our professional development lead, we work really hard to try and ensure that we've got our professional development right for each individual academy, bearing in mind their development plans and their, the areas they want to improve, but also wherever possible, looking at opportunities to work across the trust and bring people together. So that, I think, is something that we've spent a lot of time on. We use the Great Teaching Toolkit as part of that as well. And that's something that staff feel really positively about, and they can tailor that to their own individual needs as well. I hope that answers the question a bit.
Yeah, that's great. Dan, Rich, how about at Kelt?
So we've got two prevailing philosophies that I think, again, Jane and us are very much in agreement with. And the first is, it's away from appraisal towards entitlement, and the sort of older system of 2.4 blue children make 7.1 steps of progress is just long gone. And I think that there is a sector culture that's moved on, and it's definitely become more coaching. And I think that coaching is important because it's based around performance. But I think the second part of the work we do, again, so that we're centering in the whole self, is actually it's not just coaching. We've also got a really important model of check-ins, and those check-ins are about making sure that we know where someone's at, we know what's going on with them. It's not about prying, or if people don't want to give any information, that's absolutely fine. We respect boundaries. But sometimes if you don't know what's going on in someone's life, you don't know what additionality to put in place or what to signpost, or that's someone who needs those extra conversations and those extra reassurances. And so the whole system we've developed, and Rich will speak to in a moment, is about making sure that we move away from the compliance towards culture, and that we actually, again, we meet each other as human beings to human beings. There are always going to be some parts of development that are external, but again, we've got a series of groups around our Future Leaders program, our Pioneers program, which is about identifying staff at various levels, and again, not always with QTS by any stretch of the imagination, who are able to be part and parcel of looking into their own development and take charge of their own careers and their own destiny. And that self-responsibility for development and putting people forward is really important to us. Rich?
Yeah, just to elaborate a little bit on what Dan said around some of those courses for staff. We run a number across the organisation, but that's all internal. Around our deputy heads course, I've got 2 new deputy heads starting in September. They've both been through that programme. There's an opportunity to get out and see other schools, share good practice, but also a lot of that is done and invested in within the trust. Future Leader programme, which Dan's already touched on. We have really fantastic ECT programmes as well as the external MPQs and Southwest 100 as examples to put staff on as well. And just to elaborate on what Dan has said, we really have, moved from sort of that appraisal process to that entitlement for all. And it's very much about coaching for all. I think we were still at the stage a few years ago where you were coached if you really needed it and you actually needed support, and it was almost seen as, you almost weren't good enough, so you had to be coached. And we really have, where's accountability measures are needed, they're used, of course they are, but it's very much about that, it's about for all colleagues. And actually, through the directed time budget for September, we've built in every 2 weeks, every member of staff will have 30 minutes worth of coaching, one-to-one support with a mentor, coach, they're working together. And again, as Dan said, that really then allows us to work with this. It's not just around that, entitlement, it's around that staff welfare, that relationship developing and building that is just so important throughout the whole organisation. And it comes back to showing absolutely that we're kind, we care, and this is about the people.
And one small thing, if I may, in terms of how we structure our time, we've really taken away from information sharing meetings and used different communication channels so that we can instead invest that time into those relational moments where people get to be with each other, understand each other, and help to support each other's development. And so you do have to be exceptionally sharp and focused on your communication to make sure you don't lose something. But again, the idea that people sit on hard chairs for hours on end listening to someone go through the 71st PowerPoint slide are again long gone, and you've got to embrace a real different approach to culture and communication to make this work, I think.
Yeah, I love that. People can kind of take on the information on their own time and then get together to talk about it rather than just to kind of sit and take it in. Yeah, that's great. As we approach the last 5 minutes of the session, I want to just ask, I think we've got a really fun little trio here. We've got a head teacher of a school who, Rich, am I correct that you've been at Kelt for longer than Dan has? Yeah. So we've got a head teacher who's been around for longer than the CEO. We've got a CEO who is relatively new to the trust, and we've got a CEO who was a principal in the school that then became the trust. So we've got three really quite cool different perspectives here to draw upon. And the question I want to ask to all three of you is, as your roles demand different things, and over time as your roles come to demand different things, how do you make sure that you are keeping your kind of finger on the pulse and keeping those connections and building those kind of relationships, even when you're a new CEO of a reasonably large trust, or you're someone who was based firmly in one school and now is kind of attention is pulled across multiple. Anybody who's itching to answer that question first, do jump in.
Go ahead, Rich.
I'll keep this really quite simple. Really. I've been really fortunate. I've worked a couple of schools within the trust, so had a sort of a similar mantra wherever I've gone, really. And I suppose it's for those that are parents. You know, I always look at my own two sons. You know, that it needs to be good enough for them. You know, and if it's not, that's what I always come back to. Is that lesson good enough? Is that care good enough? Is that opportunities good enough? Whatever it is, it's got to be good enough for mine. And if it's not, I've got to keep asking the questions. That's what I come back to every time.
And I think for myself, as new to Kelt, so as you know, Iona, I've been a chief executive for 10 years, and this is the third trust I've led. And I've kind of learned two important lessons. The first is the key principles of culture, care, and behaviours are really important. But what you can't do is go into an organisation and think you have a solution or the answer to what that should look like, because contexts are different, people and teams are different. And I think for me, it's about keeping really true and really firm to your moral compass and your ethical approach to leadership and people, whilst remembering that the relationship is reciprocal, and so you must respond to where you find people are at and help them to get to different places if that's right, but not coming with any presupposition. And I think that's also true when I've taken schools into trust as a leader previously, which is I don't want them to fit into our model. I'd like to create something that can include all. And I think mindset, therefore, of leadership is really important, so we don't get into kind of patriarchal hierarchies or some traditional ways of thinking that can actually other or not include everyone.
Lovely.
Do you want me to come in now? I think for me, it's been important to just get to know people as individuals. I think that has been key for me. I'd been the principal of the sixth form college for about 10 years when we established our trust, and I'd been vice principal prior to that. So I've spent a long time at the sixth form college, and I did pride myself on knowing everyone. Now I can't say I know all 550 of our colleagues across our trust personally, but I do my best. And I think that a lot of that is just simple things like going and getting a drink in the staff kitchen, and we have free tea and coffee for all staff, by the way, and that's just a really nice thing that everyone just goes and grabs a drink and you can just have a chat about, you know, what's going on in people's lives. And I think that for one of the things that I've always found really difficult as I've kind of progressed through my career is the kind of view of you that comes with your role rather than you as a person. And that's something I've always really struggled with, that people think, oh, well, she's the CEO this, or she's the principal that. Well, actually, I'm just another human being having an interaction with you as a human being. And that, I think, that's something that I hold true. But I'm also just going to mention, because it's on my pinboard that's just above my screen, Dan mentioned the ethical leadership. set a lot of store by the framework for ethical leadership. The framework for ethical leadership in education, yes. So that, I think, sums up our approach to leadership as well. And I think that, yeah, the role versus the person, I think, yes, of course, you've got to be able to take difficult and important decisions and so on, and ensure that everybody's doing their best by your students ultimately, but treating each other as individuals, and you don't have to sort of, throw the role around very often, in my experience.
Wonderful. We've got 2 minutes left of the session, and I overran in my session this morning, so I'm going to try and be on time for this one. I think we can start to wrap up now, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think some of the big things that have stood out for me are that kind of deliberate culture and the intentional culture. I think the term that you used, and it strikes me that in both organisations the focus here is on doing what's right, not necessarily what is easy, and making sure that those relationships are the kind of at the core. And I think, Dan, what you said about having a people strategy, because humans aren't resources, they're more than that. I think that's really wonderful. So yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to both of you. I will give you, with 1 minute left, I will give you an opportunity for some final comments if you would like to make them.
I just want to remind everyone, if I may, many of you in this call will use Ajurio services, and that's really important, and I would back that to the hilt. Ask yourself, are you using them in a way that actually helps to transform the experience of the staff that you lead? Because listening is really important. Doing based on listening is even more important. Telling people what you're doing based on listening is probably the pinnacle. And so just make sure that what we're not doing is going through motions when we're doing this work, because to ask people to spend their time giving us that genuine and authentic feedback is really important, and it is a gift. And I think that gift needs to be held and respected in the way it deserves, in therefore the actions that we take following it.
Couldn't agree more.
And for me, I'm not going to attempt any advice, because I just want to say a massive thank you for the opportunity to talk, but also thank you to colleagues from Cornwall. It's been a real privilege to listen to what you've had to say.